my ambition is to die in Northampton, but not in the next 5 or 10 minutes, you know, but at some point in the future. I don't know, I've never really travelled a lot. I think it's possibly because I feel that the world moves fast enough anyway. That if you just stand still, the world is moving so fast in terms of how much things change, that we very seldom go to bed in the same place that we woke up, because it's changed during that day. I think that to some degree, because the world does move so fast, if I was moving around as well, I'd just get dizzy. Yeah. You know, culturally dizzy. I think that it would, to me, I think probably Northampton, it tells me everything I need to know about the world, in that places probably are very much the same. I've seen some film of pygmies in the bush, which you think in terms of human life would be as far away from us as you could get. Yeah. And that they had subtitles, they had translations. They got a couple of pygmies in the hut, and one of them wakes up in the night and says, I think the roof's leaking. The other one says, oh no, is it? Do you think it will last till morning? And the other one says, no, I think you better get up and have a look at it. And they go, oh God, you're right. And it was, you could imagine the same conversation going on in Birmingham or anywhere. I think that generally we're all humans. We all have pretty much the same lives, even though the trappings of those lives might be different. So basically, I'd rather learn about one place in depth than to have a wide knowledge of the world. I think that if I can learn about Northampton, I'll probably understand something about every community, no matter what country it happens in. You know, that's my basic theory. So I think I'll probably be a dyed-in-the-wool stick in the mud in the future. I think I should probably stay in Northampton as long as I can. Hello, my name's Alan Moore. This is Northampton, this is my town. This is the smouldering, steaming belly of Northampton, the railway station. When I started my book, Big Numbers, I chose to start it here because this is the point of entry to the town, both historically and geographically. The town started here. This was the original settlement. The ground on which we're standing was the castle of Simon de Sonley, a kind of a 10th century storming Norman Schwarzkopf who went over to the Holy Land in the Crusades and brought back most of their art treasures and goods to stock up his fortunes in the castle here. But like most of Northampton's historic buildings, we chose to pull it down. If you go over the bridge to the west, you'll find the old hills, where the Neolithic fort in which the town started was, where the Bronze Age cremation fields were, or where the Iron Age camp was that was excavated in the 19th century to build this British rail monstrosity behind me here. But like I say, this is the entry point from the town. This is where people arrive before the Carlsberg sign. A little way up the road is the Barclaycard Centre. This is the entry to Northampton, the home of the lager lout and the credit consumer. Within spitting distance from the train station we have St Peter's Church. This is a tough, gnarled old Saxon church rebuilt by the Normans. Probably one of the oldest churches in the country, but not the oldest church in the town. The church here has got saints' bones interred in it, including those of St Ragnar, one of the early Christian martyrs who was apparently blood-eagled by the Celts. This was a process that involved flaying open someone's breastbone and then exposing their innards to the rigours of bright sunlight and nature. The bones were discovered in a very gothic kind of a story where I believe that somebody had a dream and a vision of the dead saint that led them to the discovery of these relics. The church stands right in the heart of the old area of Northampton, and it's also the area that my family hails from. In fact, one of my uncles, Jack Moore, was commemorated by this war memorial here after dying in the Second World War, and it's always been pretty well the seat of my family. Although we've got no particular religious inclinations, this has tended to be one of the churches that we've centred around, and as generally the landscape around here is encroached upon by more factories, by more municipal car parks, then one has to wonder just how long this will be remaining here. Behind me is the green backing onto St Peter's Church and bounded by Green Street. Green Street was the subject of a book that was quite famous during the 60s, written by a gentleman called Jeremy Seabrook. It was called The Underprivileged, and it dealt with life at the more poverty-stricken end of Northampton. Jeremy Seabrook happened to be my French master in the first year at school, and more importantly, Green Street is where my family hails from. Behind me you can see this depressing sub-docklands architecture that has come to typify so much of modern Northampton. A bastard offspring of the Docklands development project. It is not really based upon any conventional form of architecture. It's not Tudor, it's not Georgian, it's not anything. It most closely resembles the wooden building blocks that we were given as children before they invented Lego. A certain number of pillars, a certain number of arches, and the result is pretty much the sort of the bland, faceless facade that is behind me to my right. Further away and stretching into the fields in the distance, we have all of these modern American shopping complexes, Toys R Us, all of the other developments that are slowly eating the town away at its western extremity, and of course the ever popular and ever-present spectre of the Carlsberg factory, providing new levels of inebriation for this country and its troubled inhabitants. Just up from the station we find ourselves here in Mayfair. This place is overlaid with a lot of personal memories for me. Where I'm sitting now was once part of a run of shops, tiny little old-fashioned Victorian shops that sold matchbox models, pork pies and old-fashioned knitting wool. It's now the Barclaycard Centre. Probably Barclaycard is Northampton's biggest single employer. That didn't used to be the case. We used to be a boot and shoe town. We used to largely profit from other people's misery, and that whenever there was a war, we supplied the boots that people died in. During the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell stopped just over the road on his way to the Battle of Naseby, which we also supplied the boots for. Still continuing the tradition of profiting on other people's misery, we now have the Barclaycard Centre, which of course tends to make its biggest profits when people get most deeply into debt. This is Northampton's Market Square. It's been here for a very long time, and although it's changed considerably over the last 50 or 60 years, it used to be the place that housed the Emporium Arcade, which was a wonderful Victorian arcade with a grass roof at the top of the square here. But like everything else in Northampton that was any good, we ripped it down and built something else. This was also the scene of the Great Fire in Northampton. I believe that when the town caught fire, I forget which year it was a couple of years after the Great Fire of London, and it was the very year after we burnt the last witches in the country. And somewhat ironically, the entire town caught fire. The entire population were trapped here in the square, with the flames surrounding them upon all four sides. The only way that they could get out was through a building at the top of the square there called the Welsh House. They all went in through one door of the Welsh House, escaping the flames, came out through the back door. And as again, with any building which was architecturally beautiful and historically useful, and which was important for saving the entire population of the town, we pulled it down and we built a Church's China Emporium. Here at the top of Abington Street on Abington Square, we have a statue of Charles Bradlaugh, Northampton hero, Northampton rebel. He was a Labour MP elected in the mid-19th century amidst some controversy, mainly because he was an atheist. He refused to actually swear upon the Bible when being admitted to the House. The Conservatives used this as reason why he should not be actually permitted to serve as an MP, against which the reaction in Northampton was so vehement that there were full-scale riots in the Market Square, during which the militia and armed policemen were called out to quell them. Bradlaugh was somebody that I feel a great deal of sympathy with, maybe because he was also persecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. This was when Bradlaugh, working with the theosophist and mystic Annie Besant, was distributing contraceptive advice. to women of the period, which was deemed an obscene publication. And I think that both Besant and Bradlaugh spent some time in jail, something which I've not had to do yet, but if it did come to it, at least I'd know that I'd be in good company. The idea of a divinely inspired art, it's very difficult to live by, because if you sit around waiting for your muse to inspire you, then you're liable to find that your muse is off down the road somewhere, inspiring some 15-year-old who's writing his first poem about the atom bomb. This place that we're in now is my dreamscape. This is the place that I retread endlessly night after night, and have done ever since I was some 6 or 7 years old. This is the area that I grew up in. The flats around here were built during the 40s or 50s, a sort of a post-war austerity mustard, with probably the same shirts hanging on the lines that I can remember from back then. This is a sort of a place where failed social visions came to die out, really. There's other places that were built during the Macmillan years around here. There's a whole jumble of architectural styles. But like I say, this place is emotionally special to me. That's why we used it in the book A Small Killing. There was a part of the narrative where the narrator has to revisit his hometown of Sheffield. The important point is that this is the landscape where he grew up that has that emotional resonance for him. And so because this place has that emotional resonance for me, we decided to make this the location. So we photo-referenced it. There were the shirts blowing up on the washing lines, the same steps, the same TV aerials. As I say, this is a place which, no matter how much it changes, I shall still be wandering around in my dreams when I'm 80 or 90, I'm sure. I think my ambition from an early age was to be a superhero. I remember that I got my mum to make me a costume and I got the mask. And I went and hid in a tree and waited till some of my friends walked past, and then I jumped down wearing the mask and the star-spangled costume, and they knew who I was. They said, "Oh, hello, Alan." And I said, "I am not Alan Mortals, I'm a defender of justice and decency." But I could never understand that. I mean, because all Superman has to do is to take off his glasses and comb his hair and nobody recognises him, you know. But that was my first ambition. When I realised that I probably couldn't be a superhero because of this mask problem, I thought that I'd probably prefer to be somebody who wrote or drew superheroes. This piece of waste ground here was another landscape that was very important to me, and one which we also used in A Small Killing. The reason this is so particularly important is because this is where my house stood, where I lived for the first 17 years of my life, and where my family had lived for a good 30 or 40 years before that. When I was born here, I believe there were 10 or 11 people living in the house just shortly before I was born, including my cousin Jim, who used to sleep in the wardrobe drawer upstairs. This is a real grinding tale of poverty. It's difficult to believe, looking at this expanse of ground now, that there were once 12 or 15 houses here. It would not seem possible that we could fit that many houses on so small a piece of ground. But as I say, even though there's only grass here now, this is a very, very strong part of my dream landscape. I can remember the world of back garden walls that you could never quite see over, the cobbles. I can remember the voices of the people who lived here, a constant collage of sounds, people calling their children in from play or shouting at their husbands. It was a kind of terrace landscape which is becoming increasingly at risk and endangered, and which probably won't be here too much longer. Gold Street was where we invented anti-Semitism in Northampton. It was originally the street where the Jewish moneylenders used to reside, and I believe that, unique in Europe, we were the very first to actually start physically persecuting the Jews. I believe that the story went that we put around the rumour that some Jews had been sacrificing babies in some form of bloodless, sort of bloodthirsty, sacrilegious rite, and used that as an excuse to persecute them, to stone them, and to generally abuse them. And of course the real reason we were doing that is because we owed them a lot of money, and we didn't think that this was right, and the easiest way out of it seemed to be to sort of stage this miniature pogrom. Gold Street in later years became one of the main highways and byways of the town. It was the home of Frank Brierley, and still is, I believe. He was almost a sort of a piratical hero of the Northampton working class mother, in that an awful lot of goods, many of which perhaps came from questionable sources, would end up being sold very cheaply at his shops. He spent a number of occasions in jail, one of which times he used to write one of the worst books of poetry that I've ever read in my entire life. The other interesting thing about Gold Street is an anecdote that my mother told me during the war. Living down Andrews Road, her and her sister shared a room, and one night, looking out through the window, they saw a gigantic bomber coming down very, very low over the town. Because it was so big, they actually thought that it was going to hit their house, even though it was a good quarter of a mile away. What the bomber actually did was to come down very, very low in Gold Street and crash just at the very top of Gold Street, just in front of All Saints Church. The only casualty, fortunately, was a gentleman who was cycling past on his bicycle at the time and was blown off by the force of the blast, and who broke his arm. But generally, that's not a real bad casualty rate for having a bomber crash land in the main street of your town. But Gold Street has always been somehow fairly central to Northampton, leading as it does from the primeval heart of Northampton, the basis of the old town, around the station, around St Peter's, around Mayfair. Gold Street is the way into Northampton's present. It leads you on and out from the basis of the town into the landscape that came into existence afterwards. Abington Street is a fascinating place, mainly because of how much it's been butchered, mutated and altered over the past 20-30 years. It's gradually become blanderized, in that there has been an attempt to pedestrianise it, to make it picturesque. But what we mean by the term picturesque in the 90s is the application of a fake past, a past that never happened. All along Abington Street there are these huge pseudo-Victorian street lamps, which seem to be the street lamps of an alternate world, a parallel universe where we actually had incandescent lighting all the way through the 19th century. And now in Abington Street you've got the Zephyrs, Milton Keyning between the hanging plant baskets, the pink pedestrianised precinct, and the same shop names reiterated over and over again: Topshop, Knickerbox, Pop Socks. These same logos, these same brand names are repeated endlessly throughout the length and breadth of the country, until every town is ringed in by almost a mystic pentacle of the same logos, the same brand names. We become a wallpaper society, with the same logos and symbols endlessly repeated, stamped out in a repetitive design across the country. The most interesting thing about Abington Street until very recently was the Co-op Arcade, This was a monstrous Art Deco edifice from the 1930s, but already so isolated in time that it almost took on an Egyptian atmosphere. It almost seemed to be that remote in terms of style, something isolated in the 20th century, with these nicotine beige tiles that somehow summoned up the impression of invisible dunes of sand that would drift up against the complex as it got older. The central slope of the car parkade always reminded me of the causeways down which the pyramid builders would roll the giant stones to seal up alive those slaves that were caught browsing in the Homecraft Centre. There was the car parkade, to some degree, was the last bastion of a kind of style in Northampton. Recently it's been renovated, and by renovated it means that it's been given the same fake classical windows as everywhere else. It's been repainted, it's lost all of its character. One has to sometimes conjure up a vision of what Britain might be like in 20 or 30 years when the Birmingham and Coventry conurbations have grown together, and that those in turn have grown into the Northampton conurbation. It was said that at one time a squirrel could run from Land's End to John O'Groats without ever stepping upon ground, and I think that those days might be coming again, but it won't be tree limbs, it'll be television aerials.